The hospital emergency room was in absolute silence. The doctor looked at the electrocardiogram and then at the boy lying on the stretcher, incredulous. Yusuf, a 7-year-old boy who had never uttered a single word in his entire life, had just screamed a name that no one knew. "Khaldan!" The scream had been so loud, so desperate, that nurses came running from the hallways. But now, seconds later, the boy was silent again, his eyes wide open, fixed on an empty corner of the ceiling. His small, trembling finger pointing at nothing. Or was there something there that only he could see? Yusuf's mother, Aisha, was crying in the hallway. These were not tears of joy at finally hearing her son's voice. These were tears of pure terror, because she knew, deep in her mother's heart, that this name was not human, and that her mute son had broken 7 years of silence to reveal the presence of something that should never have been named. Why did a boy who never spoke a single word scream the name of a jinn at the most critical moment of his life? What did Khaldan want with this innocent child? And why did the simple act of pronouncing that name make all the electronic devices in the hospital fail for exactly 3 seconds? This story will give you chills until the very last second. It's about silences that hide invisible worlds, about children who see what they shouldn't see, and about how sometimes the greatest miracle can come disguised as the greatest terror. So please, listen until the end, because there is a truth here that can completely change the way you see the invisible. Before I continue with this testimony, I want to ask you who are watching. Check if you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments which country you're watching from. I want to know how far this account is reaching and spreading knowledge about the invisible world and the mysteries that Islam teaches us about. Your comment helps this content reach more people. Now let me take you back to where this story truly began. Aisha Rahman was not an ordinary mother. She was a woman of deep faith, a respected Quran teacher in her community in rural Pakistan, who spent her days teaching young girls to recite the sacred verses with proper tajweed. Her home was filled with the sound of dhikr, the smell of incense burned after every prayer, and photographs of Mecca that her late husband had taken during their only Hajj together. But there was one sound that had never filled her home, the voice of her son. Yusuf was born on a cold January night during Tahajjud prayer. Aisha had been praying for a child for 7 years of marriage, and when he finally arrived, she named him after the Prophet, whose story embodied patience and divine wisdom. The midwife had noticed something odd immediately. The baby didn't cry, not when he was born, not when they cleaned him, not even when they pricked his heel for the blood test. "It's not uncommon," the doctor had said dismissively. "Some babies are just quiet. Give him time." But time passed. Months became years. Yusuf grew into a beautiful child with enormous dark eyes that seemed to see everything, understand everything. He was not deaf. He would turn when called, respond to sounds, even appear startled by loud noises. Every test showed his hearing was perfect, his vocal cords functional, his brain developing normally. He simply chose, or was unable, to speak. Aisha took him to every specialist in Lahore, speech therapists, neurologists, even psychiatrists who suggested trauma or selective mutism. Nothing worked. Yusuf remained locked in his silent world, communicating only through gestures and those penetrating, knowing eyes. But Aisha noticed something that the doctors did not, something that made her blood run cold during those long, sleepless nights when she would check on her son. Yusuf was never truly alone. It started when Yusuf was 3 years old. Aisha would enter his room and find him sitting cross-legged on his prayer mat, staring intently at the empty corner near his window. His lips would move silently, as if in conversation. His small hands would gesture as though he were explaining something to someone she couldn't see. The first time she asked him, "Beta, who are you talking to?" Yusuf simply pointed at the empty corner and smiled. That smile, so genuine, so warm, made it impossible for Aisha to believe her son was disturbed or ill. He looked happy, peaceful even. But as the months passed, the incidents multiplied. She would wake at 3 in the morning to find Yusuf standing at his window, his palm pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. When she approached, she would see the condensation on the window forming shapes, Arabic letters that spelled words she could barely make out in the darkness. The neighborhood children were frightened of Yusuf, not because he was unkind, he was the gentlest child in the community, but because of what happened when they played with him. Toys would move on their own, shadows would stretch in directions that defied the sun's position, and once during a game of hide-and-seek, a child claimed he saw Yusuf talking to a tall man made of smoke who disappeared when the child screamed. After that incident, Parents stopped allowing their children to play with the weird mute boy. Aisha's heart broke watching her son become increasingly isolated, but she noticed that Yusuf never seemed lonely. He always acted as though he had company. Maybe it's an imaginary friend, her sister Zainab suggested during a visit. Children create companions when they're alone. It's normal. But Aisha knew better. She had lived a life immersed in the teachings of Islam. She knew about the unseen world, the jinn, the angels, the creatures that existed parallel to humanity, and she recognized the signs that every scholar warned about. The temperature drops when Yusuf focused on his corner companion. The way electronic devices would flicker and fail in his presence. The strange sulfuric smell that sometimes emanated from his room after he'd been playing. 3 months before the hospital incident, Aisha made a decision. She took Yusuf to see Maulana Rashid, an elderly scholar known throughout the region for his knowledge of the supernatural and his ability to perform ruqya, Islamic exorcism. The Maulana's reaction to Yusuf was something Aisha would never forget. The old man's face went pale. His hands trembled as he reached for his prayer beads, and when he looked at Yusuf, really looked at him, he whispered something that made Aisha's world tilt on its axis. "This child is not possessed, sister. He is protected, and whatever is protecting him is far more powerful than anything I have encountered in 50 years of this work." The Maulana had insisted on performing a diagnostic ruqya anyway, despite his initial assessment. "We must know exactly what we're dealing with," he explained, spreading a white cloth on the floor of his study and instructing Yusuf to sit in the center. Aisha watched from the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. The Maulana began reciting Ayat al-Kursi, his voice strong and commanding. Yusuf sat perfectly still, his expression serene, his eyes focused on that same invisible point in space that he always seemed to see. Nothing happened at first. The Maulana continued through Surah al-Falaq, then Surah an-Nas. Still nothing. No convulsions, no screaming, none of the dramatic reactions that typically accompanied the presence of malevolent jinn. But when the Maulana began reciting Surah ar-Rahman, then, "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" something extraordinary occurred. The air in the room suddenly became thick, heavy, like breathing through honey. Every candle flame in the study stretched upward, elongating impossibly, their tips turning from orange to an otherworldly blue. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that Aisha could see her breath misting in the air. And then, for the first time in his 7 years of life, Yusuf spoke. "Don't hurt him." The voice was small, fragile, unmistakably his own, but the words carried a weight that seemed impossible for a child. "Please, Maulana Sahib, don't hurt Khaldan. He's my friend. He protects me." The Maulana stumbled backward, his prayer beads clattering to the floor. Aisha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but before either adult could respond, the room filled with a sound, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The child speaks truth, scholar. I mean him no harm." Aisha's legs gave out. She slid down the doorframe, her vision swimming. The voice continued, calm and measured, speaking in classical Arabic that even the Maulana struggled to follow. "I am Khaldan ibn Iblis al-Ahmar, of the tribe of fire that dwells beneath the mountains. I was assigned to this child before his first breath, by decree of those who govern the balance between our worlds. His silence is not affliction, it is protection. The human tongue is not meant to speak the truths he sees." The Maulana found his voice, though it shook. "Assigned? By whom? For what purpose?" "That is not for you to know, son of Adam. Know only this. The boy is under covenant. No jinn may harm him, no evil may touch him. And when the appointed time comes, his voice will be needed to prevent a catastrophe that will affect both our kinds." The blue flame suddenly extinguished, the oppressive weight lifted, and Yusuf, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, looked up at his mother with those enormous dark eyes and smiled. Then he went silent again. For 2 months after that encounter, Aisha lived in a state of controlled panic. The Maulana had offered little comfort beyond advising her to keep Yusuf close, to ensure he never missed his 5 daily prayers, which he performed with unusual focus for a child, and to trust in Allah's wisdom. But how could she trust when her son was bound to a creature of fire? The manifestations grew stronger after the encounter with Maulana Rashid, as if acknowledging Khaldan's existence had given him more freedom to operate in the visible world. Aisha would wake to find Yusuf's bedroom door locked from the inside, something impossible since there was no lock on the child's side. When she finally managed to force it open, she would find Yusuf sleeping peacefully, but the room would be ice cold despite the summer heat, and small puddles of water would dot the floor, forming a perfect circle around his bed. Her sister Zainab, who had initially dismissed the incidents as imagination, stopped visiting after the night she saw something she couldn't explain. She had been sleeping in the guest room when she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, measured, distinctly not a child's light tread. When she peeked out, she saw a shadow moving across the wall, humanoid but elongated, its form flickering like flame. And standing at the end of the hallway, holding the shadow's hand like a father and son on a walk, was Yusuf. "I can't come back, Aisha," Zainab had said the next morning, her bags already packed. "Whatever is in this house. It's not evil, I don't think, but it's not meant for humans to be around. You need to find somewhere else to live, or find a way to break this covenant." But where could they go? And how did one break a covenant made before birth? The neighbors began to notice too. Old Mrs. Siddiqui, who lived next door, claimed she saw figures on Aisha's roof at night, 3 tall beings that looked like men but moved without walking, their feet never quite touching the surface. The local grocer refused to deliver to their address anymore after his truck inexplicably stalled every time he approached their gate, only to start perfectly once he reversed direction. Yusuf remained oblivious to the fear he generated. He attended the special school for disabled children, where teachers reported that while he never spoke, he seemed to understand everything and would communicate through an elaborate system of gestures and drawings. His artwork disturbed the school counselor. Intricate depictions of beings with too many limbs, cities that existed in geometries that hurt to look at, and always, in every picture, a tall figure standing protectively behind a small boy. When asked who the figure was, Yusuf would simply point upward and smile, but the most terrifying incident occurred 3 weeks before the hospital emergency. Aisha had been teaching a Quran class in her home, 7 young girls reciting Surah Yasin under her guidance. Yusuf was supposed to be playing in his room, but halfway through the recitation, one of the girls screamed and pointed at the doorway. Yusuf was standing there, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, visible to all 8 women in the room, was something that defied description. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its form shifting between solid and translucent, as if it couldn't quite decide whether to fully materialize. Its face was beautiful and terrible, angular features that seemed almost human, but with eyes that burned with literal fire, pupils that were vertical slits like a serpent's. The being placed a protective hand on Yusuf's shoulder, and when it spoke, its voice resonated in their chests rather than their ears. "Continue your recitation. We mean no interruption." The boy wanted to listen. Every woman in that room fled. Aisha was left alone with her son and his impossible guardian. She wanted to scream, to grab Yusuf and run, but something in the creature's gaze stopped her. It wasn't malevolent, it was patient, ancient, knowing. "Why?" Aisha whispered. "Why my son?" Khaldan, for she knew now this was him, tilted his head. "Because he was born at the threshold, because his soul resonates at a frequency that bridges our worlds. And because what is coming will require a voice that both humans and jinn will heed. His silence now is preparation for the speech that will matter most." Then he and Yusuf simply walked back to the child's room, leaving Aisha trembling in her empty teaching space. Aisha knew she could not handle this alone anymore. The Maulana had been helpful but clearly out of his depth. She needed someone with deeper knowledge, someone who understood the old covenants between humans and jinn that most modern scholars dismissed as folklore. Her search led her to Karachi, to a reclusive scholar named Qari Hanif, a man said to be descended from a line of Sufi mystics who had specialized in inter-realm mediation. He lived in a small apartment above a bookshop, surrounded by manuscripts so old their pages crumbled at the slightest touch. She made the 6-hour journey with Yusuf, who seemed excited by the trip, pointing at the window throughout the bus ride as if showing invisible companions the passing landscape. Qari Hanif was younger than she expected, perhaps 40, with intense grey eyes and hands stained with ink. He listened to her story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather journal. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The covenants are real," he finally said, "though most of my colleagues would mock me for saying so. They were made in the time of Suleiman, peace be upon him, when humans and jinn worked together under divine mandate. Most were dissolved centuries ago, but some were designed to endure until specific conditions were met." "What conditions?" Aisha asked desperately. "That I cannot tell you. Each covenant is unique, but I can tell you this. If a jinn of Khaldan's lineage, yes, I know the name, it appears in the old texts. If such a being has bound himself to protect your son, then your son has a role to play in events that affect both our species. He stood and retrieved a manuscript from a locked cabinet. There is a prophecy, dismissed by most scholars as apocryphal. It speaks of a time when the barrier between worlds will thin dangerously, when rogue jinn will attempt to cross fully into the human realm, causing chaos and destruction. It says that in this time, a human child will be born who can speak the true names, the names that command jinn by divine right, the way Sulaiman once did. Aisha felt her blood turn cold. Yusuf can speak one name so far, Khaldan, the name of his protector. But if the prophecy is true, his silence is not inability, it's preparation. He is learning the language of the unseen world, and when he finally speaks fully, he will have the authority to command not just Khaldan, but any jinn who hears him. But he's just a child, he's 7 years old. Kari Hanif's expression was sympathetic but firm. The prophets were chosen as infants. Yahya was given wisdom as a child. Allah does not measure readiness by human years. He gave her a small leather pouch containing protective verses written on parchment. Keep these in your home. They won't break the covenant, nothing can, but they will prevent other jinn from interfering. Khaldan is protecting the boy from threats you probably don't even know exist. Whatever you do, do not try to separate them. That protection is the only thing standing between your son and forces that would use his gift for terrible purposes. The journey back to their village was silent, but Aisha noticed something new. Yusuf kept looking at her and patting her hand gently, as if reassuring her, as if he understood her fear and wanted to tell her everything would be all right. If only he could speak. 3 days after returning from Karachi, Aisha woke at 2:47 a.m. to find her house filled with an otherworldly blue light. Her first thought was fire, and she rushed toward Yusuf's room with her heart in her throat. But it wasn't fire. Her son's room had been transformed. The walls seemed to ripple like water, covered in luminescent Arabic script that wrote and rewrote itself continuously. Yusuf sat in the center of the floor, cross-legged, with Khaldan standing beside him in full manifestation. But they weren't alone. Surrounding them were at least a dozen other beings, jinn of various forms and sizes, some beautiful, some terrible, all radiating power that made the air shimmer with heat. Aisha recognized this gathering from her studies, a majlis, a council of jinn nobility. She should not be seeing this, one of the beings said, its voice like grinding stones, but Khaldan raised a hand. The mother has a right to understand. She has been patient and faithful. She deserves the truth. He turned to Aisha, and his burning eyes softened with something almost like kindness. Sit, daughter of Hawa. What you are about to hear will frighten you, but know that your son is in no danger. He never has been. Aisha sat, her legs shaking, unable to look away from the supernatural assembly before her. Khaldan began to speak, and as he did, images formed in the air. Memories, visions, truths that existed beyond normal human perception. 70 years ago, a group of jinn from the rebellious tribes made a pact. They sought to tear the veil between our worlds completely, to merge them and rule over both. The consequences would have been catastrophic. Humans would see what they were never meant to see. Madness would spread, and jinn would be fully exposed to iron and human weapons that could destroy us. Neither species would survive the chaos. The images showed cities in flames, humans fleeing from beings they couldn't comprehend, jinn falling to weapons that never should have touched them. We, the Covenant tribes, stopped them. Barely. But we learned they would try again, so we made our own pact with the divine order. We would ensure that when they made their next attempt, a human voice would be present that could speak with authority over both realms. A voice that could command peace. Another jinn, ancient and covered in what looked like living smoke, spoke. We searched for 7 years across the human world for a child who could carry this gift. The child needed to be born of faith, raised in purity, and most importantly, born at the exact moment when the cosmic alignment between worlds was perfect. Yusuf was that child. His muteness, Khaldan continued, is not a disability. It is a chrysalis. He hears and learns both human speech and jinn communication simultaneously. His tongue is being trained in languages that exist between sounds, in frequencies that affect both physical and spiritual realms. When he speaks fully, he will speak with an authority given to no human since Suleiman. Aisha's voice cracked. And when will he need to use this gift? The council members exchanged glances. Finally, Khaldan answered, soon. The rebellious tribes are gathering strength. They plan their move for the night of the full moon 3 weeks from now. On that night, they will attempt to shatter the veil at 7 locations across the world simultaneously. If they succeed, reality as both our species know it will end. And Yusuf is supposed to stop them? He's 7 years old. He will not be alone, Kalden said gently. I will be with him. We all will. But yes, his voice, speaking the true names, will be the key to sealing the rifts and binding the rebellious ones. It is what he was born for. Aisha looked at her son, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange. He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw not just her child but something greater, a purpose, a destiny that had been woven into his existence before he was even conceived. Can he die? She whispered. Can this kill him? The silence that followed was answer enough. The next morning, the supernatural assembly was gone, but the weight of what Aisha had learned pressed on her chest like a stone. She watched Yusuf eat his breakfast, simple paratha and chai, and tried to reconcile this normal child with the cosmic instrument he apparently was. She had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to decide if she would allow her only child, her miracle baby, her 7-year-old son, to be used as a weapon in a war between dimensions that most humans didn't even know existed. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane. She should take Yusuf and run, move to another country, change their names, hide him away where these jinn couldn't find them. Her son's life was worth more than any cosmic balance. But the faithful part, the part that had spent her entire life studying the Quran, that knew Allah never placed a burden on a soul greater than it could bear, that part whispered that running was not an option. If this truly was her son's destiny, who was she to interfere with divine will? She called Qari Hanif, desperate for guidance. The choice is not really yours to make, he said gently after she explained everything. Yusuf has already made it. In the realm beyond words, in the space before he was born, his soul accepted this role. You can try to prevent it, but you will only delay the inevitable and make it more painful. How can you say that? He's a child. He doesn't understand what's being asked of him, doesn't he? The scholar's voice was challenging. Tell me honestly, Aisha, when you look in your son's eyes, do you see a confused child, or do you see understanding that surpasses his years? She couldn't answer because she knew the truth. Yusuf's eyes had always held something ancient, something knowing. Even as an infant, he had looked at the world with a comprehension that shouldn't have been possible. That evening, she did something she hadn't done in the 7 years of Yusuf's life. She sat with him alone, truly alone after asking Kalden to give them privacy, and she spoke to him as if he could answer. Beta, I don't know if you can understand all of this, but I need you to know something. You are my entire world. When your father died, you were all I had left. The thought of losing you. Her voice broke. It destroys me. Yusuf reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek with his small hand. Then he did something extraordinary. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. Then he placed his hand over hers. The gesture was clear. I am here. I am real. I am not going anywhere. But they said you might die. He shook his head firmly. Then he pointed at the corner where Kalden usually stood and made a protective gesture, arms crossed over his chest like a shield. Kalden will protect you? Yusuf nodded vigorously. Then he pointed at the ceiling, and Aisha understood. A higher power was also protecting him. You believe this is what you're meant to do? Another nod, and in that moment Aisha saw something in her son's face that she had never seen before. Determination, purpose, a quiet courage that shamed her own fear. She made her decision that night, though it tore her heart in half. She would not run. She would not try to hide him from his destiny, but she would be there, every step of the way. If her son was going to save 2 worlds, his mother would stand witness. Even if it meant watching him walk into danger that could destroy him. The full moon rose over their village 3 weeks later, fat and red like an eye opening in the sky. Aisha had barely slept in the preceding days, spending every moment with Yusuf, memorizing the sound of his rare laughter, the way his hair curled at his temples, the weight of his small hand in hers. At precisely 11:47 p.m., Kalden appeared in their home in full manifestation, along with the entire council she had met before. The air crackled with power that made every electronic device in a 3-block radius fail simultaneously. It is time, Kalden said. The rebellious tribes have begun their ritual. We can feel the veil straining. If it tears, there will be no going back. Where? Aisha asked, clutching Yusuf close. All locations simultaneously. but Yusuf's voice will travel through the network of jinn communication, reaching all 7 rifts at once. He needs to speak from a place of power, a threshold between worlds. The old well, one of the council members said, 3 kilometers north. It was a place of worship before Islam came to this region, and it remains thin. They moved as a group through the night, Aisha carrying Yusuf, surrounded by jinn who had made themselves invisible to human eyes, but whose presence she could feel like pressure in her bones. The village was asleep, unaware that the fate of their reality was being decided in the darkness beyond their doors. The well was ancient, pre-Islamic, its stones carved with symbols from forgotten religions, but Aisha could feel why it had been chosen. The air here felt different, thinner somehow, as if the fabric of existence had worn translucent with age. Khaldan placed Yusuf at the edge of the well. The boy stood without fear, looking down into the darkness that seemed to extend far deeper than any earthly well should. "It has begun," Khaldan said suddenly, his form flickering with urgency. "We can feel the tears opening. Yusuf, you must speak now. Speak the names of binding. You know them. You have always known them." Aisha watched her son, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Yusuf closed his eyes. His small chest rose and fell with deep breaths. And then the air itself seemed to scream. A rift opened above the well, not a physical tear, but something worse, a wrongness that hurt to perceive. Through it, Aisha could see nightmares made flesh, beings of pure malevolence that pressed against the boundary between worlds, seeking entry. "Yusuf!" she screamed. "Now, baby, now!" The boy opened his eyes. They were glowing with an inner light that was not quite human, not quite jinn, but something that existed in the space between. When he opened his mouth, the voice that emerged was his. She recognized her son in it, but it was amplified, resonant, carrying harmonics that affected the physical world around them. He spoke 7 names. Each one was in a language that predated Arabic, that existed before human tongues learned to shape words. The names of binding, given by the divine to Sulaiman and lost for millennia, now spoken again by a 7-year-old boy who had been silent his entire life. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every jinn within a 100-kilometer radius, whether covenant-bound or rebellious, froze. The rebellious tribes attempting to tear the veil found themselves compelled, against their will, to cease their ritual. The rifts, halfway open, sealed with sounds like reality itself, sighing in relief. But the price was visible. Yusuf collapsed. Blood ran from his nose, his ears. His small body convulsed, as if his nervous system was overloading from channeling power it was never meant to hold. "Yusuf!" Aisha threw herself forward, but Khaldan's hand stopped her. "Wait," the jinn commanded. "He is not done." Through the blood, through the pain, Yusuf spoke one final word. Not a name of binding, but something else. Something gentler. Home. And with that word, the cosmic resonance that had been building, the power that threatened to burn her son from the inside out, dispersed. It flowed out of him and into the earth, into the well, into the gathered jinn, distributing the burden across all of them, instead of crushing one small child. Khaldan caught Yusuf as he finally lost consciousness. "The ambulance," he said urgently to Aisha. "Now. His body has suffered trauma. He needs human medicine now." Which brought them to the hospital, to the emergency room, to the moment where Yusuf, semi-conscious and delirious, had pointed at the ceiling and screamed Khaldan's name, breaking 7 years of silence in the most public way possible. Yusuf survived. The doctors called it a miracle. He should have had brain damage from the hemorrhaging, should have been in a coma for weeks. Instead, he woke after 3 days with nothing worse than a severe headache. But everything had changed. The doctors couldn't explain what they had witnessed. The electronic failures, the voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, the boy's sudden scream of a name that resonated with a frequency that shattered 2 windows in the emergency room. They attributed it to mass hallucination, to faulty equipment, to anything except the truth. But Aisha knew, and so did the handful of nurses who had been present and whose faith made them open to seeing what science couldn't explain. More significantly, Yusuf was no longer mute. His first words, spoken to his mother on the morning of the 4th day, were simple. "Ami, I'm hungry." Aisha had burst into tears, joy and grief mixing into something too complex for a single emotion. Her son could speak now. The gift she had prayed for since his birth was finally here. But the price had been so high. The innocence he had lost could never be recovered. Over the following weeks, Yusuf began to speak more, though he was selective about when and what. His vocabulary was strange, sometimes using phrases too sophisticated for a child, other times struggling with simple words as if he was learning language for the first time, because in a way he was. His human tongue was adapting to forms of communication it had been trained for, but never practiced. Khaldan still visited, though less frequently now. The covenant had been fulfilled, the veil was sealed, the rebellious tribes bound by names they could not resist. Yusuf's cosmic purpose was complete, but the Jinn guardian appeared one evening, a month after the hospital incident, and spoke privately with Aisha. "He will never be fully normal," Khaldan said without preamble. "What he did, what he channeled, it has changed him permanently. He can still speak the true names if needed. He can see our kind always, not just when we choose to be seen. He exists partially in both worlds now." Is that safe?" Aisha asked, terrified of the answer. Safe? No, but necessary. The veil was sealed, but it was also weakened by the attempt to tear it. There will be more incidents, more crossings, more conflicts between our kinds. Yusuf will be needed again, many times I suspect over his lifetime. He's just a boy, Khaldan. He deserves to have a childhood, to play, to learn, to grow up without carrying the weight of two worlds. The Jinn's expression was sad. "I know, and I am sorry, but some souls are forged for burdens others cannot carry. Your son is one of them." He paused, then added more gently, "But he will not carry it alone. I am bound to him still, by choice now rather than covenant. I will protect him, guide him, help him navigate what he has become. And he has you, a mother whose faith never wavered, even when asked to sacrifice everything." After Khaldan left, Aisha went to Yusuf's room. Her son was sitting by the window, watching something invisible to her move across the night sky. "Do you see them?" she asked softly. "Always," Yusuf replied, his voice still strange to her ears, even after weeks of hearing it. "Ami? Was I brave?" The question broke her heart. He was still just a little boy, seeking approval, wanting to know if he had done well. "Braver than anyone I've ever known," she whispered, pulling him close. "Braver than prophets and heroes and all the warriors in all the stories ever told." He nestled against her. "I was so scared, but Khaldan told me. He said being scared is okay. Being brave means doing it anyway. He's right. Ami?" His voice was small now, vulnerable. "Will I have to do it again? The speaking?" She wanted to lie, wanted to promise him that his ordeal was over, that he could be a normal child now. But she had learned through all of this that children, even ones with impossible destinies, deserved truth. "Maybe," she said honestly. "But if you do, I'll be there, always. And Khaldan will be there. And Allah, who gave you this gift, will be there. You're never alone, Beta. Never." Yusuf was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's okay then. I can be brave again if I have to." A year passed. Then 2. Yusuf grew, as children do, but never quite like other children. He attended school now, a regular school, not the special one for disabled kids, and his teachers marveled at his intelligence, particularly in languages. He spoke Urdu fluently within months, picked up English from books, and sometimes mumbled in tongues that sounded ancient and made the hair on people's arms stand up. He made friends, though they often commented that Yusuf seemed to be looking at things they couldn't see, listening to conversations they couldn't hear. One friend, a boy named Hassan, asked him once, "Do you see ghosts?" Yusuf had smiled enigmatically. "Not ghosts, other things." The incidents didn't stop. Every few months, Khaldan would appear with a troubled expression, and Yusuf would have to help again. Sometimes it was as simple as speaking a single name to bind a rogue jinn, causing trouble in a village. Other times it required travel, once to Lahore, once as far as Karachi, to seal minor breaches in the veil that only he could perceive. Each time took a toll. He would come home exhausted, sometimes with nosebleeds, sometimes with headaches that lasted days. But he never complained, never asked why him. He had accepted his role with a grace that astounded Aisha. The community's perception of their family had shifted strangely. Some people avoided them, sensing something uncanny about the boy who had been mute and now spoke with an authority beyond his years. Others sought them out, bringing problems that couldn't be solved by normal means. Possessions, hauntings, curses. Aisha had become a mediator of sorts, helping people understand when their problems were spiritual and when they were simply psychological or medical. Yusuf's gift had given her a kind of sight too, not literal but intuitive. She could feel the presence of the unseen now, could sense when jinn were nearby or when a place had been touched by supernatural activity. "We've become a bridge," she told her sister Zainab one evening. Zainab had returned, no longer afraid, drawn back by love for her sister and curiosity about her remarkable nephew. "A bridge between worlds," Zainab agreed. "But is that a blessing or a curse?" "Both," Aisha admitted. "Every day, both." On Yusuf's 10th birthday, something unexpected happened. He was in his room, doing homework, when he suddenly stopped and looked up. "Khaldan says there's someone who wants to meet me," he called to his mother. "Who?" "Another one, like me." Aisha came to his doorway, confused. "Another what?" "Child speaker. There's a girl in Egypt. She can speak the names too. Khaldan says there are 5 of us alive right now. We're going to meet." The implications were staggering. Yusuf wasn't alone in this. Others carried the same burden, the same gift. A network of children scattered across the world, each born at cosmic thresholds, each trained by jinn guardians, each responsible for maintaining the balance between worlds. "When?" Aisha asked. "Soon. Maybe next year. Khaldan is arranging it." He smiled, a real genuine child's smile. "I won't be the only weird one anymore." That night, Aisha performed her Isha prayer with particular intensity, thanking Allah for small mercies. Her son would never be normal, but at least he wouldn't be alone. As she finished her prayer, she felt a presence, not threatening but powerful. She turned to find not Khaldan, but another jinn, female and magnificent, covered in what looked like living water. "I am Noor," the being said, "Khaldan's sister. I have been assigned to you." "To me? Why?" "Because the mother of a speaker is sacred to our kind. What you have sacrificed, what you have endured, it deserves protection and honor. I will guard you as my brother guards your son. When the time comes for the great gathering, you will need your own strength, your own voice. I will help you find it." After Noor departed, Aisha realized the full scope of what had happened. Her life hadn't just changed, it had been fundamentally rewritten. She wasn't just a Quran teacher anymore, just a widow raising a child alone. She was the mother of a speaker, a bridge between worlds, a voice that even jinn would listen to. It was terrifying, it was overwhelming. But as she looked in on Yusuf, sleeping peacefully with one hand stretched toward the corner where Khaldan kept watch, she realized it was also exactly what she had always wanted, a purpose that mattered, a life that served something greater than herself, and a son who would change the world, even if that world was far stranger than she had ever imagined. 5 years have passed since that night in the emergency room, when a mute boy screamed the name of his jinn guardian. Yusuf is 12 now, almost a teenager, and the shy little boy has grown into someone remarkable. He still sees Khaldan daily. The jinn has become less guardian and more teacher, instructing him in the old laws, the ancient covenants, the delicate balance that keeps both worlds from colliding catastrophically. Yusuf has met the other speakers. There are indeed 5 of them, scattered across 4 continents, and together they form a network of protection that most humans will never know exists. Last month, Yusuf gave his first public speech at his school. The topic was Finding Your Voice. Aisha watched from the audience, tears streaming down her face, as her son, who had been silent for 7 years, spoke with clarity and confidence about the importance of knowing when to speak and when to listen. "My silence taught me something," he told his classmates. "It taught me that words are powerful, that we shouldn't waste them. That sometimes the most important thing you can say is nothing at all, until the moment when your words can actually change something." He didn't mention jinn, or true names, or cosmic battles between dimensions, but Aisha knew what he was really talking about. And from the corner of the auditorium, invisible to everyone except Yusuf and his mother, Khaldan watched with something like pride in his burning eyes. So what is the lesson here? What should you take from the story of a mute boy who pointed to emptiness and spoke a jinn's name? First, understand that the invisible world is real. The Quran tells us this explicitly. Jinn exist, angels exist, forces and beings beyond our perception are active in the world around us. To dismiss this as superstition or folklore is to deny what Allah has revealed. We don't have to see something to acknowledge its reality. Second, remember that sometimes what looks like disability or difficulty is actually preparation. Yusuf's muteness wasn't a defect to be fixed. It was training for a purpose beyond normal understanding. When life gives you challenges that don't make sense, consider that you might be being prepared for something you can't yet see. Third, know that children are capable of extraordinary courage. We often underestimate them, try to shelter them from hard truths, but sometimes young souls carry old wisdom. Respect the strength in your children, even when you don't fully understand where it comes from. Fourth, understand that protection sometimes comes from unexpected sources. Aisha had every reason to fear Khaldan. He was a creature of fire, a jinn, something her religious education had taught her to be wary of, but he proved to be the most faithful guardian her son could have asked for. Don't judge by appearance or expectation, judge by actions and truth. Finally, recognize that we all exist between worlds in our own way, between faith and doubt, between the seen and unseen, between who we are and who we're meant to become. Yusuf's story is extreme, yes, but the core truth applies to everyone. We are all bridges. We all carry purposes we don't fully understand, and we all must find our voice in the darkness. Before I leave you, I want to ask, have you ever felt like you were meant for something you couldn't name? Have you ever experienced something that science couldn't explain? Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and seen understanding that shouldn't be there? Leave your answers in the comments, share your stories, because the unseen world is closer than you think, and the more we acknowledge it, the less power fear has over us. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that open your eyes to the mysteries that exist just beyond normal perception. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that their challenges might be preparing them for their purpose. Yusuf still lives in Pakistan. He still helps maintain the balance between worlds. And Khaldan still watches over him, a guardian who proved that sometimes the most terrifying appearance can hide the most faithful heart. Remember, in this world and the next, silence and speech each have their time. The question is whether you'll know which one is needed when your moment comes. May Allah grant us all the wisdom to see beyond the visible, the courage to accept our purposes, and the faith to trust in what we cannot see. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.